Latina Voices is proudly sponsored by United Airlines, the official airline of Latina Voices Smart Talk. Goya Foods. When it's Goya, it's got to be good. And Fiesta Mart, serving you since 1972.
This time on Latina Voices Smart Talk, George P. Bush. Just the name perks up the ear when heard in political circles, especially now. The third generation of the Bush political dynasty is considered one of the new faces of the Republican Party and one who may deliver an important demographic. Next on Latina Voices Smart Talk. A show about universal topics with a Latina point of view.
Latina Voices Smart Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Minerva Perez with my co-host, Texas super lawyer Sofia Adrogué.
We're a show about universal topics from a Latina perspective. So let's get started with some smart talk,
I know,
Minerva.
and you've been reading a lot.
You know what? I'm a voracious reader. There's a book that just came out, Daring Greatly. Dr. Brene Brown, she happens to be at U of H,
yeah.
Homegrown, not her first book. But it is amazing. It's a book, Daring Greatly. The quotation comes from the quote that all of us have heard before, Theodore Roosevelt: the credit goes to the man who's in the arena.
Yeah.
Whether you may have the high of the triumph of high achievement, but at worst you fail. Failing, though, daring greatly. And thus the theme. And what she says is this concept of vulnerability that all of us, including for me, quite frankly, we see as a weakness, okay? It is not, you want vulnerable, do we show vulnerability? Do we show vulnerability at the office?
Do we stick out our necks?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And her sense is, that's exactly right. Do you stick out your necks with things that you do? And she says vulnerability is actually the key to value. It's creativity, it's courage, and connection. She gave this speech in Houston. It then became, it was put on TED Talk.
International.
Over 6 million hits.
Wow.
Other than Steve Jobs, that is the most reviewed reviewed speech. I think because people appreciate the fact.
We've tried to get her on the show.
I know, and we'll get her. We'll absolutely get her. What I loved also is she linked the Daring Greatly to then giving us a very valuable life lesson, and we can utilize it for our kids, but also our daily lives. And also, our friends if we're trying to help out. And she says, talking about kids, if we're following our children into the arena, hushing the critics and assuring their victory, they'll never learn that they have the ability to dare greatly on their own.
To stand on their own.
Exactly.
And that's what you have to do with your kids. I mean, you're raising them, hopefully, the best way you can so that they can stand on their own in the winds and the storms and everything.
But isn't that great also? You can apply not just to your kids, to your colleagues, and to even yourself. So the bottom line is, do you come fully prepared, fully loaded, never showing vulnerability that you can make a mistake, or do you show your raw self? And I was thinking about this in having met George P.
George P. Bush, who's on our show today.
In the interview, don't you think he showed a little bit of who he is? Yeah. I don't know, vulnerability, but really
humility.
Humility.
Exactly. He was an amazing. You're right. He's dynamic. Yeah. He's smart. He knows where he's going. Yeah. That was my impression. What was your impression?
Absolutely. But also the fact that he gets it, that he comes from this great, amazing family. But he himself has to be his own individual and deliver. Yeah. And that's a little bit about daring greatly. Yeah.
And he's been raised well, obviously, by our talks with him about where he's been.
There's no
and
doubt.
The audience will be part of this discussion a little later in the show because we talked at length about where he is, where he was, where he is, and where he's going. And I think the audience will be very happy with that. And it kind of relates to what your book.
I mean, he is daring. The truth is, he could just stay within his comfort zone, continue to do well financially, and being the business entrepreneur that he is, or he can decide to go ahead and put himself out there in the public, and potentially, as he's recently decided, to run.
Obviously,
which we
didn't know at the time.
Absolutely,
but we were trying to get to when we spoke to him, and we'll be
Daring
speaking to him
Greatly,
today.
Dr. Brown's book.
I'll have to wrap that one up. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, stay tuned to Latina Voices. We'll be right back with George P. Bush. While the latest election cycle is over, there's one name that is emerging for Texas statewide politics. His name is George P. Bush, the scion of the storied Bush political dynasty. His latest move is filing papers just in time to seek public office.
The eldest of former Florida Governor Jeff Bush, grandson of former President George H.W. Bush, and nephew of President George W. Bush. The younger George is blazing his own trail and recently taught to us at our alma mater, Rice University. He gave us insight into his political future as the Republican Party's rising star.
It's very flattering, but I try not to read my own headlines. I understand I've been in the news as of late, but really, maybe it's a Bush family trait to just work hard and let everything else fall where it may. I've been delighted to be asked by the state Republican Party to help them out in terms of campaign finance. I've launched Hispanic Republicans of Texas in addition to MAVPAC, which is now a federal PAC, in addition to helping out with Governor Romney. So I'm definitely busy. We'll see where the future takes me, but I love helping out wherever I can.
Well, and it's interesting. There's been so much success, so I surmise you feel a real onus and responsibility and probably hyper-scrutinized all the time.
That's for sure. Having said that, as a member of the family, the last thing we talk about in discussions are politics, if you can believe that. We tend to talk about sports, we talk about the latest going on in our lives. And there really, to be honest with you, I'm not just saying this, that there is no pressure to go run for office. But there is pressure to help others out. And my grandmother, Barbara Bush, instilled that virtue in all of us to give to others before you give to yourself, whether it's in politics, community service, or other avenues. I just happen to have that political bug, which I just can't seem to get rid of.
Now, you are the Deputy Finance Chairman for the Republican Party of Texas. Is that just a fundraising role?
Well, it's the predominant role in that title. The Republican Party at the state level has been trying to stabilize its resource base for some time, and I'm happy to be involved with that effort to grow its capital base. On occasion, I am pulled into interviews and discussions with respect to the party platform and the way forward for the party, because as we all know, the state is changing before our very eyes. And so strategizing with party leaders is part of that role, but for this election cycle, it's mostly focused on fundraising.
Now, for MAVPAC, that is your role, to harness the Latino vote. How successful has it been?
Well, MAVPAC actually is focused on young professionals. Hispanic Republicans of Texas has been my particular focus with respect to Hispanic outreach here in the state of Texas. And before we got started, there were no Hispanic Republicans in the state house. There are now 7. We're supporting a gentleman by the name of Raul Torres, who's running for state senate, who could be the first Hispanic state senator of the Republican Party, which would be historic for not only for our organization but for the party as a whole. We've supported Eva Guzman, who's our state Supreme Court justice as well. We focus on grassroots politics and building the bench for the next generation of Hispanic leadership. Additionally, we have a sister entity called Hispanic Leadership Alliance, which is focused on engaging Latinos in the political process, getting them to register to vote, discussing issues like teenage pregnancy, childhood obesity, the issues that everybody sometimes is afraid to talk about, but we as a community really need to come to terms with if we're going to be a prosperous state and community.
Now, the GOP is actually sending mixed messages to the Latino community because of the voting ID card, the fence along the border, the send them all back attitude. How are you going to change that?
Well, I, along with other Republicans, are starting the effort. And personally, I look at 2 items. First, the fact that a majority of Hispanics self-identify as independents for the first time in our country's history. Over 40% of Latinos don't consider themselves Democrat or Republican. They're increasingly voting for the person. And so my point being that a vast majority of Hispanics or a vast majority of Republicans, whether they're elected leaders like Attorney General Abbott or Governor Perry, I think see eye to eye with the community on just about every issue. It's just a tiny minority of the party, and this applies to the Democratic Party as well, where there's extremists that I think has no place in political discourse, but that's just the way politics is. But I would argue that a majority of Republicans feel that we can obtain a sensible solution with respect to immigration reform. Just look at my uncle when he was President of the United States. He was the one who sponsored a proposal on the House floor and the Senate, and narrowly it was defeated, but it was close to pass a substantive, comprehensive immigration reform proposal that went above and beyond just the DREAM Act. It would have dealt with the adults that are here that are undocumented. My second point is, and I'm going to borrow a quote from my good friend, fellow Houstonian to you all, Jacob Monti, who owns the largest
We like
Hispanic
him.
owned
We've
law
had
firm.
him on the show. He's
great-
a nice guy. We even read his book.
Yeah,
The
Gringo's Guide.
The Gringo's Guide.
Really? So I
He's
got to
very-
check that out.
Yes.
Oh my gosh,
He
I've
did an
got to
entire
read it.
guide and was cavalier enough to call Gringo in there.
But it was also kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it was actually pretty straightforward.
So getting to
Yeah.
your point,
No,
Bart,
but
Jacob
the point,
Monti.
but the point, he's a fine American. His point is that, look, the Hispanic community and the Republican Party agree on 80% of the issues. The media, and not to castigate your profession, but focuses on the 20% that we disagree on. And so whether you're talking about issues of life, of gay rights, of small business entrepreneurship, which I think outside of what's happening in the Middle East is the big issue for this election cycle that we tend to see eye to eye on. So I try to focus on those issues as well as Jacob and other members of our board at the Hispanic Republicans of Texas.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask because I know people would want to know. You can use as many words or as few, your option. How would you describe yourself?
I would describe myself as humble, unassuming, with a tireless work ethic. I've just learned through through politics behind the scenes, whether it was my dad when he was governor of the state of Florida, or my uncle when he was running and working behind the scenes for my grandfather, or just helping out my grandfather's races, that nothing is given to you in life, and that you got to go out there and earn it. And so a hard work ethic was one of the most important things that I learned at a young age. I think my grandmother, as I mentioned before, serving others, really taught me to not be assuming, to never have a sense of entitlement, to go out there and earn everything that I have. In fact, they're the ones that have said, don't go out there and run on a name and run on a track record. Go out and build your own professional background before you go out and consider public service. And I've really taken that to heart in approaching my day on an individual basis.
There's more Latina Voices after this.
Welcome back to Latina Voices. We continue our exclusive interview with the undeniably dynamic Texas super lawyer, rising star, George Prescott Bush.
He shies away from questions of being a member of the Bush political dynasty. He says the D word is not used at home.
Well, we as Bushes don't view it as a dynasty. In fact, we call it the D word, or the L word as far as legacy. We just view it as public service. I mean, my grandfather decided to throw his hat in the ring when he first ran for U.S. Senate, ran for U.S. Senate twice and lost. And what he demonstrated through his public career is a willingness and a tireless and humble willingness to serve others. And that was his calling. Not all members of the Bush family are focused on going to run for office, but I will say that I had that bug. I mean, my first memory was when my grandfather announced in 1979 that he was going to go run for president. And I remember holding a Bush for President balloon and wearing a Bush for President t-shirt, and I think I was just getting out of diapers. And since that time, it seems like I've been a part of a political campaign. So maybe it's genetic as it relates to me, but I definitely personally have an interest. But to answer your question, we don't view ourselves any different from any other family, to be honest. We, like I said, when we get together, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas, we talk about sports, we talk about what's going on at work, and occasionally politics comes up, but it's not anything that's held over our head that we have to go out and run. I think they would be just as happy if we didn't do politics.
You're an attorney. We've talked about you being a business entrepreneur, Naval Reserve intelligence officer, community leader, political maverick. That's a mouthful. Lot you've done. Also teacher. Tell us about that experience.
Well, it was, again, a really informational experience for me. After I left here at Rice, actually, I had an opportunity to train through the Department of Education here and left with a certification to teach both in Texas and Florida, and had the opportunity to teach in a migrant farming community in South Florida, close to where Homestead Air Force Base used to be, but where the eye of Hurricane Andrew came over. which forever changed the dynamics of the community. So most of my children were of Mexican heritage and of Haitian background. I was immediately assigned to the dropout prevention program and started with 120 students. I lost, a little over 20 students to teenage pregnancy, to drug abuse, and to just dropping out, because under Florida state law you could drop out at the age of 16. So it was trying as a young idealistic person coming out of college, but I learned that you can achieve success one person at a time. Several of the students I was able to recruit to the first ever high school speech and debate team at Homestead High, and some of them were able to go win statewide in a competition. So I take that victory with me, with me every day, and view that as a success.
And you probably see very much how much people suffer, and really what obstacles many people have.
Absolutely, especially in the home visits where you go and visit with the students, and several of which I've, in public housing where you see and witness people using drugs right in plain sight, or committing graffiti or other acts of nuisance right in the community in which the student resides. And I would have kids with excellent IQs and excellent intelligence, but they had broken homes. Yeah. And those kids struggled more than the kids that didn't have as strong IQs, but had a family that was there and supportive of their education. And so, it was again a challenge, and that's what teachers face in communities throughout our state. And so, we've got to figure out ways to make it easier for them, because we're asking them to do so much.
There's no doubt.
In 1992, I remember covering the convention, and I remember your grandfather was quoted as saying that he had some little brown grandchildren. You were one of
Yes.
were the little brown one. Looking at it now, how do you feel?
Well, I'm still fascinated by the focus and the scrutiny on that quote, because for somebody that grew up with him in my 36 years of life, that I know him to use that term in an affectionate way. In Spanish we say morenitos.
Los morenitos.
And that's a term of affection. We focus kind of on something that distinguishes you, like flaquita or gordita or something like that. And so I don't want to go there, but so and so the direct translation would be little brown one. And so so I know and he knows, and that's really all that matters. And so when I talk about, when we talk about politics, we talk about the scrutiny of media. As long as, my wife and I have our marriage and our foundation, that's all that matters. As long as I have that relationship with my family and my friends, that's all I need in life.
It could be Florida. It could be Texas. Now, giving credit where credit is due, we are here at Rice University. Allow me to say that, please. Okay. And we're both
We have to
Rice
make a
graduates.
plug.
Is that okay, Minerva? Okay, thank you, Minerva. Rice University, Houston, Texas. Why Texas?
Well, Texas is home. I went to college here, and to be honest with you, on a professional level, this is the best place to do business in the country. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, CNBC, 2 of the last 4 years have deemed Texas as the best state and to do business. And I'm an entrepreneur. I've launched 2 successful ventures. I'm now in the process of launching my 3rd venture. I've been a practicing attorney, and I talk to my friends outside the state, and they explain their situation. And they're professionals, and they lament how things aren't as good as they are in the great state of Texas. So from a professional standpoint, I don't think there's a better place to start a business or consider a career. On a personal basis, I met my wife at law school in Austin, and she's a West Texan. And for those of you who know West Texans, you know that they're very difficult to pull out of the state of Texas. And so love is another reason why I'm here in the great state of Texas. I still have an affection for Florida, sure. But in all seriousness, on a personal level, all my friends, a lot of my family are still here in Texas. I try to get back to visit my parents in Florida, but this is where home is. We love Fort Worth. It combines the best of West Texas and Dallas, and we've enjoyed it.
George, you call yourself not a politician, but one who is politically involved. Is that going to change in 2012 or 2013?
Well, I've been requested, and I've been asked to look at running for political office in 2014, and so I'm giving a close look. I will tell you that. But right now, my focus is really on MAVPAC, HRT, in addition to the Texas Republican Party, and really between those political activities and running a business, it's keeping me busy. But like I said, I'm drawn to public service. I would be honored and privileged to serve Texas, and I'm giving it a look.
And you know, Sophia, he's done more than look at it. We'll have more Latina Voices in just a moment.
We're back with more Smart Times, a segment which we usually feature eye reports from students' journalism of the 21st century.
But you know, today we'd like to continue the discussion with attorney and entrepreneur and soon-to-be political candidate, George P. Bush.
Now, at least according to Wikipedia, George Prescott Garnica Bush.
Bueno, lo que pasa es que mi nombre es George Prescott Bush.
Yes.
And
Who
I don't know
added
why.
Garnica?
That's, well, Wikipedia, sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong.
Well, of course, and it's your mother's
That's
last
my mother's,
name.
yes, that's my mother's maiden name, but
Yes.
Wiki, for some reason, they add things to my
Well,
bio
I have
that
to
are
tell
just...
you, I have to
In
tell you,
Mexico, it's correct. Garnica, I mean, actually, it's Bush Garnica. If you
Yes,
had it in
exactly.
Mexico.
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And
no,
well,
it's
I have to be frank. I was a little excited because my children, I tell them, if they want, to be in the will, they've got to. All of my children are Skylar Adroge Gustafson. So I was really getting excited about meeting your mother.
Yeah.
I thought she got the name in there, but you obviously feel Hispanic as well.
Claro que sí. I mean,
There you
it's
Y lo
it's part of me.
podríamos hacer en Spanish,
En
but
español
probably our
podríamos hacer la
audience,
entrevista.
we could absolutely do it, but half of our audience would want it in English.
Okay, that's understood. But yeah, I mean, this discussion has come to the limelight, especially around election cycles, with the emergence of Julian Castro, the Castro brothers, who are actually good buddies of mine, and the emergence of Latinos at the national political stage. And I think the ultimate litmus test is whether there's a recognition of the culture more than anything else, a recognition of one's heritage, the contributions that Latinos play, whether it be in the military, whether it be in education, whether it be in entertainment. Our culture is so rich, and I think these leaders, these emerging leaders, whether they're Marco Rubio or the Castro brothers, as long as they recognize it, that's what the community is looking for.
You heard your calling a few years ago and ultimately got the opportunity to become a Naval Reserve's intelligence officer. Tell us a little bit about why and the opportunity.
You know, in 2005, when I was finishing up my judicial clerkship with the federal judge, Sidney Fitzwater in Dallas, I was ending my public service, if you will, with the federal government, and I felt like I wanted to do more. I remember sitting on the couch and watching the news incident of Pat Tillman, and how here you had an NFL athlete give up a professional football career to serve his country. Not only serve, but serve valiantly. And I felt like I really needed to do more. And I'm not alone. The 9/11 generation stepped up in a big way. I mean, people forget that in the last generation, it required a draft. This generation, it was completely voluntary. So I convinced my wife to allow me to apply for a commission in 2006, and I got my commission, direct commission. I went through the DCO program in 2007. My recruiter basically said, look, if you get this, you're probably going to be deployed. And I said, well, that's the reason why I'm signing up. And so in 2010, my number came up. A few instances I tried to deploy before that, but there was a leak within the Pentagon that kept on insisting in releasing the information of my upcoming deployment. So I finally was able to deploy anonymously in 2010, and was there at Bagram Airfield for 6 months. And it was a fascinating experience. I learned a lot about myself, what I'm good at, maybe what I'm not so good at. But more importantly, I wish I had an opportunity to start earlier and younger and do it more often. I still serve. I have 3 years left in my commitment. And as you alluded to, our unit is looking closely at the events in the Middle East, and already there's an elite Marine force that's already there off the coast of Libya just to observe what's happening. But you're right. I mean, we face a generational struggle, and it's going to require the will of this country, everybody, to make that assessment as to how we design our foreign policy.
George H.W. Bush is your grandfather, and you obviously love him very much.
I love him with all my heart. He's my hero, and whenever I have any doubt or concern in life, he's the first guy that I call or email, and to this day, he's always on his BlackBerry, now iPhone, and responding to my questions and texts, and just an extraordinary man. If I can be half or even a quarter of what he's put together in his life, then I'll consider that a pretty good life.
More Latina Voices in just a moment.
We'd like to thank you for joining us on Latina Voices. We'll be back next time with more interesting topics that matter to all of us.
And for Latina Voices Smart Talk, I'm Minerva Perez. Don't forget to join us on Facebook.com/Latina Voices and LatinaVoices.com as well. Until next time, stay tuned.
Latina Voices is proudly sponsored by United Airlines, the official airline of Latina Voices Smart Talk. Goya Foods. When it's Goya, it's got to be good. And Fiesta Mart, serving you since 1972.